Hi, everybody. I'm going to tell you about where we lost our marbles. And this is a story that is not going to be for everybody. It was only for uh, some small group of the super soldier children. Uh, so it happened way down in Arkansas. They always love their secret places. And this was one of Aquino's favorite places to take kids, actually. So you go down on 7, and it's 7 minutes from a certain town and 7 minutes from another town, and the address is 777. So they tried to make this group of super soldier kids their shepherd's fold in a place called Marble Falls. And it's also another reason why we were obsessed with collecting marbles, because this place took so much from us, and marbles were also part of the programming there. And this place is set up very oddly. There is buildings in the woods. Everything's private. Keep out. Don't pass out. It was once a very thriving place, but what happened to us there was far from normal. It's the story of the Stranger Things, because you can't get any more stranger than Marble Falls or Dog Patch. So they had some of us kids down in the Dog Patch, and they tried to split time and keep us there for as long as they could for most of our upbringing. And it's a place where we fought the hardest and where some of the most intense things happened. And it's why it's so hard to access for some people's memories, because it's like they put a steel band around our forehead sometimes, it felt like. And then when you break some of that programming, it's like the screws break off and you break through so many levels that they had buried us under there, because they tried to take away and strip away our entire identity there, but it didn't happen, because most things that they tried on us didn't work over time. So it was a hub, and it was not only a human trafficking hub there, but it was a satanic network hub, and many other things were going on at the same time. It was not, I wouldn't say it was as intense as Montauk, but it was definitely a side project of that. And this went on for about 20 years or more, I would say. And what I remember, my earliest memories of being there was I was probably 5 years old, and I was taken down to this area where there's a big cliff and a cave, and we'd have lanterns at night, and we would go down, and then we'd go through this little shed area where there was wasps and spiders. And um, on the surface, it can look pretty some days out there, but if you look closer, it was very creepy everywhere out there. So they take all these kids down this path, and even the toys there were very creepy. They were just like old and rusty, and some of the toys looked like aliens, and we played on them. They didn't make much sense. The toys were bonkers, most all of them, especially the slide. There were very dangerous toys out there. So my earliest memory is going and walking down into this valley. There's a lot of foggy valleys. At night we would be taken there, and we'd go through with lanterns and have to stand on this green bridge. And Alpha was inside of this other house. There's a house here and a little house here, and the bridge that connects the two. And then he would be at the end sitting in a chair. And they're always very theatrical, so they had to make their happenings theatrical, of course. So he would amplify his voice, which would echo off this cliff. And to a child's view, it looks way bigger than what it is, of course. And the shadows are cast. And then they would even throw an alligator in the water sometimes to go underneath our feet in the bridge to make it even seem more scary, like something was in the water and we didn't know what. So there was these big holes in the cliff walls, and in one of these holes you could look up, and when it's kind of like this Bohemian Grove dramatic thing playing out, because they had us in robes and everything. So I would see this image of a djinn coming out of the cliff wall, and it was like Orko on He-Man, one of those type black djinn looking things, but his eyes were glowing yellow. And then he would come out of the cliff and look at us, and then you'd hear this voice, but it wasn't coming from where the hole was. So Some of the kids had figured that out. I was too little at the time, so I was terrified, thinking that this like master jinn was controlling this whole complex, and we had to do what he said. But what was happening is that they had projected a holographic image outside of that hole that would come, and you could see some of the light reflecting off the inside of this cliff opening, and then you would go led into this other house, and there was always, gatekeepers, doorkeepers, key holders, different people and titles that we knew with this whole occult community, wacky village. So then Alpha would be sitting at the end in a chair, and then you would have to always go past him, and then get into the cave, because there was openings and doors into some of these cave systems that all connected, and houses sometimes in the back of them led right into the caves. And then there's sometimes waterfalls in the caves and other areas where they would have rituals done in the caves. So then they took us into this other cave area, and it was a dirt floor, and then they had cement slabs, but they're just natural stone slabs around. And what they wanted the kids to do was, there would be like an animal in the middle of the cave, or else there would be a child, an adolescent, and then an adult. And they would try to get you to come around an altar to whoever was in the middle of that circle, and take turns hurting that person, or kicking, or hitting, or even cutting that person. So that is what we had to fight. Just one of the things right off the bat with that place. So it happened in one of the times when I went in there, somebody was holding my head down to look at this thing that was happening to this victim on the floor. And I was praying in my head. And then when it was my turn to go, sometimes if you didn't participate, they would try to make you lay down, and then you would be the victim. So I resisted that. And then something came over me. My prayer was answered. Light came in to this place, and it broke their spells. And I surprised a lot of people because I was the littlest one there. But I went around in a circle and put my hands out, and I started roaring like a lion, because I saw in the spirit that the spirit of Jesus Christ came down in there, and I saw him as a Lion of Judah. And I was so muted and silenced already from this place that he opened my mouth to be able to roar. So I just looked at everyone with no fear and courage that was supernatural, because it just rushed upon me like a mighty wind. And I roared around like a lion, and everybody's minds were not controlled then. They couldn't force us to do anything that day. So they just kind of gave up, and everybody knew what had happened, and everybody felt the presence of the Messiah come in there and flood the place with light. So then the darkness scatters when that happens. We're in our sound mind. We get to go out, and we had victory that day. And he gave us victory in these places over and over, because no child would be able, it's unsurvivable. For one, the things that they tried to put us through and that we did survive. For anybody without supernatural help from on high, it would have been unsurvivable completely. So from the beginning, they saw things like that happen, which made them want to try harder to get under our skin, to turn us, and to make us forget how many times that God had come and helped us. So the Freemasons had oversight in this place. There's a lot of different people coming and going, and biker groups coming and going. And there was usually two guys inside eating a steak, and they were reptilian, so you couldn't go in there without permission to talk to them. And if you did, it wasn't really a good thing anyways, because they would tell you what you were supposed to do. So with these other buildings, there's different parts to this place. And with one of the buildings, we called it the House of Horrors, and it was a lodge. But it had been designed to get you dissociative, and there was like doors painted on the walls, and windows disproportionately coming out, and doors leading down into the floor, like Alice in Wonderland type imagery. So sometimes you could spend the night in there, but then you'd look and there would be like a painted window above your head with a Bigfoot looking out at you, or things reminding you of the trauma they were putting you through. So one time I stayed in there, and I remember I had a hard time getting out the door because of the way this place was set up. And even sometimes stairs didn't have railings, and other things they did to throw your equilibrium and your balance off. Everything was always aimed to keep you confused and disassociative. Because when we did have full clarity and break through these altars, we had way more power than what they did. And one time we actually did break through, and we rebelled, and we ended up stomping on the whole roof of the circle building, and then we punched holes through the roof. Other buildings were very odd. It was an A-frame community. Sometimes there was symbols painted on trees, like a skull meant the doctor lived there and you didn't want to go into that house. There was other indications and markers that we knew where places were, what they meant. And there was another huge building on top of the hill that nobody was allowed to talk about, called, it looked like a panopticon inside, and it had all these windows, just hundreds of windows. And there's another main building, but sometimes we stayed in trailers, and sometimes we took showers under the waterfalls. Because the place was pretty big, actually, but we eventually found our way out of it. But it was overwhelming at first, being taken there. There was a dark mother that would show up once in a while, and an abandoned campground. And then she would take some of the kids in this small circle tent that was tiny, and we'd sit in a circle, and she had a steel box. And what the hillbillies did before this and other KKK camps was try to normalize their type of satanic sacrifice with goats and lambs and whatnot. So, or they'd have pig roasts. We wouldn't eat any of their meat. She would take out pieces of, like, say, like a rabbit's foot or part of a goat or a lamb, and bring it to these. They had these chimneys that were kind of like the campground fire pit, but it was like a big chimney from a house. So then she would put that on there, and we'd have to stand around her, and she'd burn it. So they tried to normalize what they were doing, but their form of sacrifice is just killing. It is just a mockery and a perversion of the one true pure sacrifice, which is the Lamb, who is worthy because he was the blood atonement for all of mankind. So some of the kids didn't understand that, and I actually remember fighting with some of the kids about it, telling them they're making fun of Jesus. They're making fun of sacrifice, because they would always say it's a sacrifice, but I knew that they were just killing, and there was a difference. So then sometimes they had made wooden idols too that were very creepy faces on them, and the mouths were creepy, and then they had stick hands. So to keep the programming in there and not tell about the cults and the trafficking and the bike clubs, the drugs, smuggling, all the things that were going on in this place that was supposed to be family friendly, they would place these cursed objects right in front of the doors where they knew that we would go into in the morning, and they were as tall as us, of course. So then we would open the door, and there'd be this demonic looking cursed object, like wood with a big face on it. So then we just back up, and they did things like that to constantly make us revert back into what they had already programmed us into, as little of kids as possible, to keep you always backing away into that fear programming. So the hub back then was like something out of Eyes Wide Shut, because there was a big black staircase that led up, and there would be people standing on top of there. And then there was a bottom part, and they had an octagon circle at the bottom. And we all had numbers, so you didn't want your number called, because that meant that you had to come down to the altar and talk to the high priest and get picked for something. So that place, many kids blocked out, but they would take kids and bring them down this black staircase, and then they'd have to go up to the altar, and still very theatrical. They had, the microphone, and Always made it seem like it was so much more powerful and bigger than us. But over time, we just kept breaking through whatever they kept doing to us. And then we would try to leave. So we would plan things like, because we knew how to survive out in the woods by ourselves. But then somehow we would just kind of keep staying there. And we try to remember numbers, like the zip codes on the post office box or something. But it's like then we would forget what that even meant. But over time, eventually, we did get over our disorientation, and they knew how to trap us constantly with our altars is what was happening. So it was very high strangeness, because to us at first it looked like we were in a cartoon village. And the place, for one, they told us it just didn't seem real to us, because it was called Dog Patch, for one, and we didn't think any real place would be called that. So we'd have old brochures that we'd look at, old books. So we'd just go through the wreckage of this whole amusement park and look at the map. Then they told us to go and find the borders of the city, this village that we were in. So then that was kind of fun doing that one day. But then they had set up some type of parameters where we couldn't leave the boundaries. So right away they made us know that what boundaries we had, and we couldn't leave that area. So we were exploring quite a lot at the beginning. We'd go over old wooden bridges, very terrifying things. I almost fell in the water once. I couldn't swim very well. I had to have two of the kids come and save me, because this wooden old piece from the bridge fell and I was falling into the water. We'd go and explore all the old these rides. One was called the Brain Rattler. That one we made a lot of fun of, because it was the most uncomfortable, stupidest ride you could think of. That just went in a circle above this pole. One of the first things we did was we saw a humongous slide that went, it was just crazy high. And Casbold, of course, ends up climbing it, and then he slides down it, and then just starts like jumping and running after he bounces off of it. And he looked like a cartoon. It was hilarious, because we thought he was just gonna fly flat on his face, but he kept propelling himself forward so that he wouldn't face plant. And for years we would bring that back to memory. Like, remember when you ran like a cartoon and jumped off that slide? It was bonkers. So a lot of things to us just seem cartoonish, and they programmed these cartoons into us, because this whole complex was based off of a comic book, for one. So they tried to make me and 11 these greased pigs, they called us. And one was named Moonbeam McSwine, and the other was Wolf Girl. So I was Wolf Girl, and she was Moonbeam. And Casbolt and some other kids that were there, the guys, their greatest fear was becoming these like hillbilly, slang talking, mental degenerates that were stuck in this village, because they had a coin, and they told Casbolt that was going to be him and the characters and the cartoons. We would go in the administrative buildings and look at these cartoons every day, and they were very real to us. And we had a lot of good laughs with those cartoons, because they were just so bizarre. And the language, we started speaking Southern, and that's not normal from where any of us came from. So we'd have to snap out of that too, because the signs that were everywhere was meant to be like this backwoods, hillbilly, weird place to begin with. So everything that we read was very bizarre, to say the least. So then we would go explore more places. There's a lot of remnants of things that we left there. Like, there's holes in the walls in the hotel from us kicking it with our feet. There was a theater that was there that had, they did some type of simulation there where they had these big orange balls there all over the floor and all over the stage. And they would trap us in an altar somehow, make us drop down a screen and start making me dance or sing or get into this character. And then they would have this screen projector on the top that would project onto the floor. And sometimes I would think people on the screen behind me were dancing with me, and they tried to trap us in these simulation scenarios to see what we knew was reality and what wasn't in any of our altars. And then they would throw fruit at me, like oranges or something, when there was all these orange balls on the floor to make me see. They would see if you knew the difference between the simulation or not, like what was oranges, what was what, and then you'd have to break through that and see what was reality and what wasn't. And then if you broke through any of these things that they did to you, sometimes you could get strong enough and you'd like fight your handler or something. I remember fighting with mine in a car and lots of other places. Yeah, there was kids were being taken out. They disappear. There's a lot of clan activity that they were involved with too. Biker gangs. Kids would leave. I was stuck with this one satanic biker one night. There's a wood stove, and he would go into the main old ticket area and spray paint like these satanic symbols in there. And I remember trying to get through, wondering if this person would ever change. But most people there were not good people, and they were under some type of mind control. So there's different areas. Back down to this other area where we had the ritual area, cave area, things done to us. There was one time where my actual parents dropped me off there, and there was cartoon characters. Well, the woman looked like a witch, like this hag with a black cloak on her. And I just remember being embarrassed because I didn't see any other kids' parents there. So the head sorcerer would tell them like 2 weeks or however long I was going to stay there, but it always seemed to be a different time period or longer that they tried to keep us. So then my father, who dropped me off there, got the instructions, looked at me an altar and said, like, you will loves it. And then they would just leave me there. Or my mom would have her hooded sweatshirt on and just like make the face like the witch lady in the cartoon. It's like they were looking at the map and these cartoon maps too, and they were also part of the programming. The characters built into that whole structure were a big part of it. So what happened at the end, a lot of us broke through a lot of our programming. Caspol was one of the first ones. And what he was doing was, if he was really violent and raging, that meant that he was normal. So we were happy when he was like that, because what they did with him is they took him into the woods, and there was a square synthetic building that he would go into, and he would have burn sessions done to him there. So then if he'd come out, he would be like the nice, docile, easygoing kid that liked us and wanted to play with us and ask us questions. And then we just didn't trust him. Like, wait a minute, where's the real James here? So then we would snap him out of that. And he was fighting the programming at first really bad. He just wanted to get home and get out of this crazy village that we were in. So he ends up finding a knife one day, and he went around and he just went like all gung-ho, ninja style. He started slashing everything up in this amusement park, like all the windows and stuff. There's slash marks still. That's from him. He was even like slashing the trees up, and he was like ready to take on the handlers that were going to come down a little bit. And we're like, yeah, this is going to happen. And somehow we always got pushed back into staying here in this stupid cartoon village. But he was smart. He would outdo them. He would snap out of altar when they take us on little bus rides. They took us everywhere through the Ozarks, deep training in the woods, waterfall areas, all sorts of things. But the weirdest thing that they did to us there was we would be in these valleys, and we would be overlooking the fog in the valleys, and we would hear these Bigfoots screaming at night. And they knew that we had contact with normal, natural Sasquatches. And they actually had helped us at times, carried us. They could burn reptilians. They could open the ground up, throw them in there. They could throw them, chuck them like logs. Some kids could call them out of the woods and they'd just appear and help us if we were circled by anything, really, not just reptilians, but humans or whatever was trying to war with us. So they created these things that we called hybrid firewalkers. And these things were crazy. They were a Bigfoot, but then they had like these marble fire eyes. And their voices sounded metallic. So they programmed them to hunt us. And they hunted us through the rivers. And then we would try to trap them for them. And one of them that was hunting me, because I knew every area and spot that it was going to come to, I put a line in the water and it couldn't hurt me and it couldn't accomplish what it had been programmed to set out to do. And a circle of eagles came over my head and I had victory that day because that thing may have had occult fire, but I had holy fire. And there were so many supernatural things that happened that stopped whatever their plans were, because they would come up with the craziest things and still none of it could kill us. So then they would take this, they'd shoot it, and then they would take these hybrid firewalkers and take their hides. Now, I can't remember what they were doing with their hides, but that's what I remember them saying. And the scariest night there, I would say, was not being stuck with the Klansmen, the Imperial Wizards, and all the other stuff they did, and their lanterns and their horses, and all that. Like, they had covered us in gold once too, and did some type of Fourth Reich ritual with us out there, and tried to do something with time travel tech as well in the middle of the night. And they had one kid holding the cross, and that all goes back to the giant clans and the 3K clans in the Old Testament that were connected with the Amalekites that went against and pursued the Israelites in the wilderness. And what those people worship is Nimrod. And I always thought that part of the programming of the Fourth Reich was the weakest and the dumbest, because God showed me that these welcoming committees that have their torches and are wanting to welcome the giants and their multicolored wizard uniforms and whatnot, the giants are going to trample right over them when they come back. So the joke's on them, because anybody who worships Nimrod in these old clan giant cults, because Klukulios means circle. They were circle cults of old giants, and they even did a Cyclops ritual too. They're going to be trampled under. There's not going to be any reward for them. And their women and their Rehoboamites, all the things that they tried to do to us, none of it worked. They even had one of those women at Montauk, because I would go out in the woods and there would be a cloaked woman standing there with like a pitchfork, and they would come out of nowhere sometimes, like they were stalking us, soul stalking us. Sometimes the women were actually the worst, but they had different face hoods. Sometimes they had horns on their face hoods, and different colors meant different things and whatnot. And we met a lot of different groups of people throughout all of this. Okay, so back to the firewalkers, the genetically modified Bigfoots that they created. The scariest part for me was I was down in the amusement park area at night. And so one by one, they would have those things hunt us. And you could hear them coming out at night. And it was the craziest sound, because the one time, this thing, not only its voice was metallic and they were strong as hell, but it ripped down all the pieces of the roller coaster that was coming down the hill. So, the park closed for different reasons, not just because it wasn't making money. It's because it was running the place, and secret government project was going on there, and all sorts of other things connected. So there was like metal pieces all over the place that night. There was hiding behind different things and trying to trap this thing. And it took like one of the little tugboats from one of the rides, and it picked it up and it threw it like all the way to the other side of the park. So there's pictures of that thing still sitting there, and that's why it's not by the water at all, because it just got like chucked way over the other side of the park. So at the very end of this, I remember breaking through a lot of altars. I had a huge awakening. And for some reason, I like to spray paint too on the walls. So I found the nicest building that wasn't falling apart, and I spray painted all over it. And I wrote, "We are pissed," and some swear words and teardrops. So that was their warning. And then I ended up ripping the head off of this their mascot outside. It was like a pig. I called it a dog, but it was like a pig dog. So that got thrown over. We destroyed a lot of things, as much as we possibly could there. And yeah, we survived a lot there. I might just stop there, and then I'm going to say a prayer in the next video about Marble Falls. But basically, in a nutshell, yeah, we had a lot of deep woods training going on there. It was connected to our prior training at Montauk, and this happened for about like a decade there, because we felt like we had been like kidnapped and trafficked by these crocodile people, because we would have like alligator ice. We saw alligators. We saw a lot of backwoods weirdness that is just, it's too bizarre to even explain, like what we were thinking in our mentality, what was going on then. But we survived. And the only kids that did survive this is because they had divine intervention. And that's why our memories can be accessed now, because we were supposed to survive to bear witness of heaven's will, and that our Heavenly Father sees everything, and there's nothing that went on that wasn't seen. Even though nobody saw what they were doing to us, which happened a lot of the time, he saw it, and he'll be our justice and our vengeance. And we're supposed to bear witness, and it's by our testimony and the blood of the Lamb that makes us powerful. It's not anything we could have done on our own. It's because we never lost that faith, and they never broke off that connection completely. So a lot of these places and their lingering remnants are being found out. A lot of things are being pulled up from under the rug. People are burning things in buildings, cementing things in basements. They're trying to cover up so much, because it's just like this domino effect, even through the islands and through these remote locations. The Ozarks was a huge one for some of the super soldiers, because it went on in secrecy for way too long. And we never knew when we were going to get out of there, because there was so many places and so much deep mind ops and training that went on there. And it was one of the hardest things that I can remember to break through, because there was just so many levels of it and so much of it. But yeah, I'll leave off for there, and I will say a deliverance prayer for the Ozarks in a minute here. Bye.